Welcome to the Underclass Podcast with Austin Picard. I'm an independent researcher who can't stomach being lied to on a daily basis by the mainstream media. While we live in a fracturing society, launched into parallel realities, falling perfectly onto the two sides of the political spectrum, I remain in the underclass. H.L. Mencken once said, "The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for himself, without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable. And so, if he is romantic, he tries to change it. And even if he is not romantic personally, he is very apt to spread discontent among those who are." Episode 10. We focus on sowing discontent as we completely disregard the prevailing superstitions and taboos constructed with the sole purpose of intellectually confining us to subconsciously facilitating the continued growth of the state. Today, we spotlight the federal government's abuse of power, providing a much different perspective on what I view as a complete mishandling of an unwarranted conflict unnecessarily escalated by government agents, which would inevitably lead to the tragic loss of life, including 28 children, becoming widely known as the Waco Siege or the Waco Massacre. We're all Branch Davidians now, as we find ourselves on a 77-acre compound headquartered at Mount Carmel Center Ranch, 13 miles northeast of Waco, Texas. According to the Washington Post, in an article published June 10, 1993, less than 2 months after the siege, with the title, "Koresh called 911 when raid began." A dramatic 911 tape of a conversation between Branch Davidian leader David Koresh and local sheriff's deputies, recorded in the early moments of an armed confrontation in February, reveals that Koresh knew in advance that federal agents planned to storm the cult's Waco compound. "We knew you were coming and everything," said Koresh in a 30-minute tape played yesterday for members of a House Appropriations Subcommittee probing the siege. Koresh also said he knew the identity of an undercover agent who had set up residence near the compound and infiltrated the group. The tape renewed questions about one of the most violent incidents in U.S. law enforcement history and the decisions made by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in planning for the failed raid. Top ATF officials said yesterday that agents were instructed to abort the raid if the element of surprise was lost. 4 ATF agents died in the February 28th firefight. 51 days later, more than 80 Davidians, including Koresh, perished when the compound caught fire and burned after the FBI injected tear gas inside. The tape, tinged with the sound of gunfire in the background, offers a window on the chaos of the raid's early minutes.
Hello? Yes. This is Dave Koresh. I'm supposed to call you guys.
This is who, sir?
David Koresh. Mount Carmel Center, we're being shot all up out here.
Okay, where are you?
Oh, where am I? I'm at Mount Carmel Center.
Okay, hang on just a second.
All right.
Okay, don't hang up, David, okay?
All right,
I'm going to get somebody to talk to you.
74427.
Are you in the complex?
770. Turn it on. Hold on, I've got another man.
Are you in the complex?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're here.
Okay.
I've got you on the other side of your phone, so I'm going to pass you. So hold on just a minute. Okay, hold on.
Like a post coming.
Yeah, this Lynch. Hey, Lynch? Yeah. That's kind of a funny name there. Oh, listen, no, look.
Now, who am I speaking with?
This is David Koresh.
Okay, David.
The Notorious. What did you guys do that for?
Well, David, what I'm doing is I'm trying to establish some communication links with you.
No. Let me tell you something.
Yes, sir.
You see, you brought a bunch of guys out here and you killed some of my children. We told you we wanted to talk. No, how come you guys try to be ATF agents? How come you try to be so big all the time?
Okay,
Now,
David.
there's a bunch of us dead, there's a bunch of you guys dead. Now that's your fault.
Okay, let's try to resolve this now. Tell me this. Now, you have casualties. How many casualties? Do you want to try to work something out? ATF is pulling back. We're trying to...
Why didn't you do that first?
Okay, all I'm doing is handle communications. I can't give you that answer, David.
Okay.
Okay?
Now, here's the deal. Yeah, you pull your guys out, and I want to talk. But I want to talk on what's it called, Steve?
I couldn't hear you. I've got Wayne on the other phone, so go ahead now.
Wayne Martin?
Yeah, he's on the other phone with me. I've been talking with him, but you're the man that I need to talk to, David.
Yeah, well, really, let me tell you something.
Okay.
In our great country here in the United States, God's given us a rich history of patronage. No, we're not trying to be bad guys.
Okay.
But the thing of it is this. There is a God who sits on the throne. I know it sounds crazy to you, but you're going to find out sooner or later.
Sure.
There are seven seals in his right hand.
All right.
The question of theology has overstepped who's the one that opened that book. Now, that's what I've done.
Okay.
It's your Bible. There's seven seals. Now, there's some things in that Bible that have been held as mysteries.
Yes, sir.
About Christ.
Yes, sir.
Now, when it says in Revelation 22, behold, I come quickly, my reward is with me, the statement is, what reward did Christ receive in heaven from his Father? He received a book with seven seals.
Yes, sir.
Now, when I'm told throughout theological departments that they're going to ruin me because of what I present out of the book, just because they can't present it and I can't, there's a meaning to that.
Okay.
Now, in the prophecies, it says...
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Sure.
All right. We can talk theology, but right now...
This is life. This is life and death. The theology
that's what I'm talking
is life and death.
Yes, sir. I agree with that.
You have come and stepped on my perimeter.
Okay.
See, we will serve God first. Now, we will serve the God of the truth. Now, we're willing, and we've been willing all this time to sit down with anybody. You've sent law enforcement out here before.
Yes, sir.
And I've stayed on them straight across the table. I said, if you want to know about me, sit down with me, and I'll open up a book and show you seven seals. Just like I told Robert. You know Robert, don't you?
Yes, sir.
The guy that, your agent.
Yes,
See,
sir.
we've known about this. I've been teaching this for 4 years.
Okay.
We knew you were coming and everything. You see,
Yes,
we knew before you even knew.
Well,
There's the spirit of prophecy. The testimony of Jesus Christ is a light that shines in a dark place. Now, you need to learn Deuteronomy 32.
okay. But let me ask you this. The present situation, let's start resolving it, and then we can sit down and talk. Right now, we've got everybody cease firing, okay? So that's what we want. Now, we're pulling the guy back from the door. ATF is going to pull the guy back from the door.
They want to know who they can get their agent officer.
All right. Can they come now, David, with your guarantee and pick up their injured officer without being fired on?
Look, I cannot communicate with everybody here.
Okay. Do you have any way? Is there anybody that can? Do you have a facility to communicate with the rest of the folks there in your house?
Well, we would have if y'all guys had talked with us.
Okay. But right now, all right, what ATF is wanting to do is to take their injured troop out of your area. Okay? But what you're telling me is you can't control folks because you have no communications. Is that correct?
Well, if you give us some time, we could probably get the message around.
Okay. Would you start?
How many individuals are you planning on sending to take the wounded away?
All right. Stand by. How many troops are going to remove that injured ATF agent? Okay, we're stand by there. We're having a heck of a problem with communication. Stand by just a second. All right, they're going to send in 4 men to move. Wayne is shooting again. Hold on just a second. Ask Wayne to please cease fire. Okay, no, ATF is not firing. All right, we're going to send in 4 ATF agents. Can you pass that word?
Well, I tell you what are they going to be dressed in?
Pardon me?
Are they going to be dressed in white, unarmed?
All right, stand by. No, they'll be in their blues or dark blue uniforms. Okay.
What are they?
Pardon me?
911.
Just a minute. David Koresh here. Just a moment.
Okay. Yes, David.
Okay, we got David back.
What's the Rangers now?
Okay, David, let me give you Lynch, okay, David?
Okay.
Hey, David, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened.
The line went out.
Okay, I just talked with Wayne. He's on the other line. So, what I want to do, he wants to know which side of the building they're going to come in. We're sending in 4 ATF agents. Hello?
I'm here.
Okay, good. we're sending in 4 ATF agents, okay? So, and then let me give Wayne some instructions because evidently he is there closer to the injured person. Then I would like to work with you, and I understand from visiting with Wayne injured folks, we'd like to take care of them for you, okay?
Well, they're not injured that bad.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood.
They don't want you to take care of them.
Okay, then we'll move on to something else. Let me get with Wayne. I need you to hold 1 second, okay?
All right.
Wayne? Okay, I've established communication. Ready to begin? Now you need to know which side they're coming on. Just a moment. Here's David. Okay.
Oh, boy.
David?
Yeah.
Okay. I've got Wayne now. We're trying to get that coordinated. And the sticking point now is getting the injured officer out of there. Then we'll start, trying to talk to y'all.
Why didn't you try to talk at first?
Okay. You got me in a distance.
You put me in charge of somebody that I'm going to be dealing with later. Put me in charge of the men that organize this.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to do.
I know, you guys are very foolish.
That's what I'm trying to do.
You don't know what we have. You don't know what we've got.
All I'm doing is trying to...
And you end up like this ATF, BATF, you guys, you're going to get a big butt whoop.
Okay.
And you need to call the President of the United States and explain to him what you've done.
Yes, sir.
You ruined this country. You ruined the nation. Hey, this is a democracy, supposedly a republic, you know?
Okay, stand by and let me get with Wayne, and then we'll be able to do more talking. So, can you stay on the line?
Well, my battery's getting weak, so...
Okay, all right. I've got your number. I can call you back. I want to establish a link with you and some folks at ATF, okay?
Okay.
All right. All right. Stand by. Just a minute. Let me see if I can do that. Stand by.
February 28th, 1993. Only 6 months after the siege at Ruby Ridge. More than 80 agents from the BATF had planned a sudden daylight raid in order to serve a search warrant for the compound, as well as an arrest warrant for Koresh for potentially violating federal firearms regulations. The search warrant was obtained due to suspicion of modifying weapons to have automatic fire capability because of a claim that Koresh had purchased kits with M16 lower receiver parts. ATF allegations being that David could have been combining M16 trigger components with a modified AR-15 lower receiver, which is, according to ATF regulations, constructive possession of an unregistered machine gun without paying the $200 tax for legality. None of this was proven, and the Davidians were known for partly supporting themselves by trading at gun shows and always having the relevant paperwork. Even one of the members, Paul Feda, was a licensed federal firearms dealer operating a retail gun business called the Mag Bag. Reportedly, the original investigation started when in 1992, the ATF became concerned over reports of automatic gunfire coming from Mount Carmel Center. On July 30th, ATF agent David Aguilera and agent Skinner visited one of the Branch Davidians' gun dealers named Henry McMahon. He tried to get them to talk to Koresh on the phone. Koresh offered to let ATF inspect the Branch Davidians' weapons and paperwork, and even asked to speak to Agent Aguilera, but he declined. According to the Waco Tribune-Herald, Sheriff Harwell told reporters regarding law enforcement talking with Koresh, "Just go out there and talk to them. What's wrong with notifying them?" Instead, the ATF would use the affidavit filed by Special Agent David Aguilera to obtain the warrants that led to the Waco Siege, even admitting in the affidavit that neither the noise complaints nor the items ordered were necessarily illegal. The Davidians were known for being very cordial with everyone in the surrounding community, seemingly held in high regard by most people in the area, including the local sheriff. They were known for having daily devotionals, studying the scripture for over 8 hours at a time, and by every account they barely even drank except for at most a couple beers at a get-together every few months, but no more than 3, said former member David Thibodeau. But before the ATF could follow through with the search warrant, they would need to prove an operational drug nexus in order to obtain military assets for the raid. The ATF's investigation was primarily focused on firearms up until this point, but in a 1999 report to the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of the Treasury, titled Military Assistance Provided at Branch Davidian Incident. The ATF made a claim that Koresh was possibly operating a methamphetamine lab requesting assistance from the DEA and the United States Department of Defense, citing a drug connection based on a recent delivery to the compound of chemicals, instruments, and glassware, as well as National Guard overflights, thermal images showing a supposed hotspot inside the compound, possibly indicating what they called a methamphetamine laboratory. The no-knock raid had been planned for Monday, March 1st, but they were forced to move it up by a day in response to a series of articles the ATF had reportedly tried to prevent from being published in the Waco Tribune-Herald called The Sinful Messiah. The ATF raid of the Branch Davidian compound, dubbed code name Showtime, would officially begin on a gray, wet Sunday morning, February 28, 1993, when civilian trucks with black cattle trailers filled with over 75 agents brandishing fully automatic weapons, outfitted in SWAT-style tactical gear, arrived at Mount Carmel, ready for war. The victims inside the house would describe them as men in black, unidentifiable when coming toward you. While not standard procedure, the agents even had their blood type written on their arms or neck based on a military recommendation in order to facilitate speedy blood transfusions. Before we lose ourselves in the details of the initial raid and ensuing 51-day siege, we should familiarize ourselves with the unorthodox way of life embraced by the members of the group. The Branch Davidians, a splinter group from the Seventh-day Adventists, had come to believe that David Koresh was the Lamb, meaning that he would precede the second coming of Jesus Christ as told in the book of Revelation. In addition to being the group's spiritual leader, Koresh assumed the burden of sex for the male Davidians, meaning that he, and only he, was allowed to sleep with female members. It didn't stop there. Koresh also took multiple wives himself, one even as young as 14 years old. While this was technically legal under Texas law, the blatant immorality of these actions were partly used to justify the ATF's excessive tactics during the siege. According to former member David Thibodeau, and one of only 9 people who survived the fiery finale to the siege on April 19th, when asked point blank about the form of polygamy practiced by the group in an article for Reason magazine, quote, "As far as the sexuality is concerned, David didn't have sex just to have sex. He always had a goal, a focus, and that was to have kids. He wanted to have as many kids as possible. A lot of people forget that. They just say there's this guy, all these stupid people followed him, and he just wanted to have sex, and that was it. I can think of 100 million better ways to do it. A lot of people have a wife and then mistresses, and they hide it and cover it up. David was very open about what he was doing because he believed it was a scriptural thing. It was a very complicated thing, but the plan all fit together. I never understood how so many women could live together under those circumstances. It's a mystery of God, let me tell you. How could all these guys hang out and let that happen and not do anything?" Reporter: "Didn't the guys get upset? You were single, but for the other guys, it was their wives Koresh was sleeping with." Thibodeau: "Of course, Steve Schneider was often upset about it, but at the same time, he had spent 6 months trying to rip David apart to prove him wrong before he joined the group. So did Paul Feda. They worked together trying to prove the message wrong. They couldn't do it. So they said, 'He has the truth.' So at that point, they fell into line. They believed it was the message of God, that it was for this higher purpose, and that they were in the inner circle of the Anointed One. Think about that. They would sacrifice everything to be with this person, to have some sort of part in the fulfillment of this eternal plan. It's something the world wouldn't understand. They might be wiped out for it, but eternally, they will have great position. It's a pretty amazing dynamic. They believed that Koresh was the next spirit Messiah, the prophet who would come to fulfill this part of the truth. They would stand with him and come back to set up the kingdom here on earth. Thibodeau got the opportunity to explain their beliefs a bit further when he was interviewed in the Dallas Observer. The media has gotten lots of things wrong, Thibodeau says. He never considered himself a Branch Davidian, he says. The first time he ever heard that term was on TV. He also never considered Koresh the Messiah. Thibodeau says he believed Koresh was a prophet, but the people in the compound weren't worshiping Koresh. He considered Koresh a friend, but he wasn't blind to his flaws. Koresh was married to several women, some quite young. Husbands and fathers gave away their wives and daughters to be with Koresh, who would father 12 children with his wives. Koresh certainly was guilty of something. He was either a polygamist or he was guilty of statutory rape. Probably both. Depends on how you look at it. You have to look at the legality. The bottom line is, at the time, I don't know what the law is now, marriage with parental consent was 14. That doesn't make it right at all. The Branch Davidians originated in 1955, when a schism in the Shepherd's Rod or the Davidians, which were an offshoot of the worldwide Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Shepherd's Rod or the Davidians were founded in 1929 by Victor Hotef as its president and prophet after he was excommunicated from the Seventh-day Adventist Church for promoting heretical doctrines. According to the Christian Research Institute, the group was headquartered at a property known as Mount Carmel Center near Waco and reached its peak in the early 1950s with thousands of adherents before splintering into various factions after Hotef's death in 1955. At the core of his ideology, and the foundation of the Davidian belief, was a prophecy of an imminent apocalypse involving the second coming of Jesus Christ and the defeat of the evil armies of Babylon. The center had been named Mount Carmel after a mountain in Israel, mentioned in Joshua 19:26 in the Old Testament. By 1959, Victor's widow Florence Hutef announced that the expected Armageddon was about to take place. But after the failure of this prophecy, control of Mount Carmel Center would fall to Benjamin Roden, the founder of the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association, known as Branch Davidians. He would promote slightly different doctrinal beliefs than those of the original Davidian organization, and upon his death, Louis Roden, his widow, would take control of the center. According to multiple reports, Lois considered their son, George Roden, unfit to assume the position of prophet. Instead, she would groom a young man by the name of Vernon Wayne Howell to be her successor, later changing his name to David Koresh. Vernon reportedly chose David in order to include himself in the lineage linking him directly to the biblical King David, from whom the new Savior would descend, also connected to the throne of David, which Jesus would occupy after he returned. Author Jeff Gwynne would write, "The last name Koresh, however, has an extensive backstory. Vernon chose Koresh because it is the biblical name of Cyrus the Great. For his first heavenly insight, Vernon was reminded of Cyrus, king of Persia, mentioned prominently in Isaiah. Babylon conquered Israel in 586 BC and took many Jews into captivity. But when Cyrus and his Persian army defeated the Babylonians 47 years later, they freed the Jews, returned them to their homeland, and with the Persian king's own money, rebuilt the temple there. Cyrus is described in Isaiah as a Messiah of God, meaning one appointed by the Lord to provide a special service. Several Messiahs are mentioned in the Bible, but Cyrus is the only Gentile so designated. Vernon Howell was informed that he was the same Cyrus, whose name in Hebrew is Koresh. Vernon must take that as his name. Like his biblical namesake, David Koresh would rescue the righteous from Babylon." Before this starts to sound exclusively like a cult lacking any real credibility, I should mention that David Koresh and member Steve Schneider had been traveling the world talking to various religious leaders, and they would tell respective members that they were only trying to learn what the Bible actually means. Various biblical scholars, theological experts, priests, and rabbis from all around the world had been flying into Waco, Texas, only to visit Mount Carmel and study David's teachings of something he called the Seven Seals. The story would always be the same. Each one of them would claim that David came to their seminary school or their synagogue and sat down with them, only to teach them more about the Bible within an hour than they had learned in the past 2 or 3 years at their schools or houses of study. David's half-brother Roger said in an interview that when Vernon was young, Roger would go to work and he would be sitting there reading the Bible, and Roger would come back from work 8 hours later, and Vernon would be in the exact same spot, still reading the Bible. A lot of the older members would say that when Vernon Howell first came to Mount Carmel in 1981, he didn't appear to be that bright. He had previously been a carpenter, was good at fixing things, but also had a stutter and lacked social skills, certainly not expected to possess leadership qualities. Although after going on a pilgrimage to Israel, he returned, claiming to have been shown a new, deeper knowledge of the Scripture, granting him the understanding and ability to interpret and teach the seven seals and an acquired depth of knowledge, including new gifts he did not previously possess. According to members of the group, David would issue a challenge to people. He would say, "This book is sealed with 7 seals. No man can reveal it. I wonder if you might let me show you. Maybe I can reveal it." Many staunch religious people would grow upset by the challenge, would typically say things like, "Are you saying you are Christ? Or are you saying you are the Lamb?" And he would say, "No, I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, let me show you the 7 seals." In an interview on the Pete Quinones show, a former Davidian member, David Thibodeau, claimed that one time Koresh jumped on stage in his introduction to the Seven Seals teachings to a new large group, and he lifted up a Bible and he said, "A lot of people look at this as 2 pieces of cow leather and a bunch of pages in between. And some people spend their whole lives trying to figure out what this book says, what this book means." He held it up to his forehead and he said, "I see this book panoramically from Genesis to Revelation, as if it is happening before me right now as I'm speaking to you." And Thibodeau said his immediate internal reaction was, "Yeah, whatever, that's a pretty tall tale." But then, over the course of the next 2 weeks, really within 2 or 3 nights, Thibodeau claimed to be convinced that David Koresh really did see the Scripture that way. Much later, around 6 months before the raid took place, Thibodeau said that he was up shingling the roof of the larger house when David Koresh looked at him and said, "Thibodeau, what are you going to do in 6 months from now when there are tanks running up and down the Double E Ranch Road?" And he looked at him and said, "David, I don't care what your message is. This is America. They're never going to bring tanks on this property." He reportedly did the same thing with Kathy Schroeder, another member, when he looked at her and said, "Kathy, what are you going to do when helicopters are buzzing this building?" She responded, "David, there's never going to be helicopters on this property." The demographic attracted to this ideology ranged wide, with many foreign nationals calling Mount Carmel home, as well as African American families, including Wayne Martin, who was a Harvard Law School graduate and served as Mount Carmel's resident attorney, considered to be the second or third in command, behind or equal to Steve Schneider, and also the first to call 911 the day of the February 28th raid, asking them to call it off for risk of harming women and children. The New Yorker would tell a story Around a month before the raid, a group of undercover agents posing as college students moved into a house across the street from the Branch Davidian compound. Their rental cars gave them away. The agents hosted a party to deflect suspicion, but it had the opposite effect. Some of the Branch Davidians showed up, mingled, and reported back to Koresh that these were federal agents for sure. Jeff Gwynn writes, in the recently published Waco, David Koresh, the Branch Davidians, and a Legacy of Rage. Another agent, Robert Rodriguez, posed as a potential follower to gain access to the group. Koresh quickly pegged him as a Fed, but kept inviting him to Bible study anyway. After all, as he reminded his followers, Jesus had preached to a Roman centurion. The day before the Sunday morning raid, Treasury Department officials in Washington attempted to call it off, concerned that it relied on unnecessary force. Why couldn't Koresh be arrested when he was away from the compound? But a plan, once in motion, has a certain momentum. And the ATF, which had a congressional budget hearing approaching, was in need of a splashy, successful operation. One ATF was so confident that the mission would be over in a few hours that he booked tea time in Houston for Sunday afternoon. On the morning of February 28, 1993, Rodriguez, still ostensibly undercover, listened as Koresh was tipped off that a raid was imminent. Rodriguez rushed to report the news to his superiors, sure that they would abort the mission since the plans relied on maintaining the element of surprise. Instead, the raid proceeded disastrously. If the feds wanted to arrest David Koresh, the only person listed on the search and arrest warrants they had manipulatively obtained, there were all the opportunities in the world. He had even patterned his jogging routine to conveniently pass in front of their undercover house in an effort to provide them with exactly that. All of the official claims of being unable to apprehend him away from the property are patently absurd. There was even an official investigative report issued by the Department of the Treasury that stated, David Koresh and two undercover agents, including Rodriguez, went about a mile off property and all shot firearms together. Why didn't they arrest him then? Undercover agent Robert Rodriguez had been in the house at Mount Carmel on many occasions and said that he saw no signs of illegal activity and that they should call the raid off. The Treasury report would document and confirm that on the morning of the 28th by 8 a.m., the day of the raid, Agent Rodriguez went to the compound one final time for the most critical phase of his undercover assignment, assessing whether the Herald Tribune series of articles had incited Koresh and his followers to take up arms or otherwise increase their security measures. Koresh greeted the undercover agent and invited him to join a Bible study session with two of his followers. There were no signs of unusual activity. While Koresh and Rodriguez were engaged in this Bible session, member of the group Perry Jones had just been warned by his son, who was a local letter carrier, that had just been accidentally tipped off by a lost cameraman working for a news station wearing a KWTX jacket and looking for the compound. Not knowing he was affiliated with the group, the cameraman asked for directions and indicated that some type of law enforcement action was about to take place at the compound, likely to be a raid of some type, and that there might be shooting. Perry Jones devised a fake phone call pretext to draw David away from Agent Rodriguez so he could warn him of what he had just learned from his son. And according to the report, upon Koresh's return, Rodriguez could see that he was extremely agitated. And although he tried to resume the Bible session, he could not talk and had trouble holding his Bible. Rodriguez grabbed the Bible from Koresh and asked him what was wrong. Rodriguez recalls that Koresh said something about the kingdom of God and proclaimed, "Neither the ATF nor the National Guard will get me. They got me once and they'll never get me again." Koresh then walked to the window and looked out, saying, "They're coming, Robert. The time has come. He turned, looked at Rodriguez, and repeated, "They're coming, Robert. They're coming." Rodriguez was shocked. As Koresh repeatedly looked out the window and said, "They're coming," Rodriguez wondered whether the raid was beginning, even though he was still in the compound. Needing an excuse to leave, Rodriguez told Koresh he had to meet someone for breakfast, but Koresh did not respond. Other male members entered the room, effectively, if not intentionally, coming between Rodriguez and the door. Fearing that if he did not leave, he would be trapped in the compound, he contemplated jumping through the window. He repeated that he had to leave for a breakfast appointment. Koresh approached him and, in a manner Rodriguez believed highly uncharacteristic, shook Rodriguez's hand, and said, "Good luck, Robert." He then left the compound, got into his truck, and drove to the undercover house. Agents in the undercover house recalled that Rodriguez was visibly upset when he returned from the compound. He called Charles Sarabin, the overall tactical coordinator for the raid at the command post, and told him that Koresh was upset, that Koresh had said ATF and the National Guard were coming, and that as Rodriguez left, Koresh was shaking and reading the Bible. Sarabin asked Rodriguez a series of questions from a prepared list provided by the tactical planners. Did you see any weapons? Was there a call to arms? Did you see them make any preparations? Robert responded in the negative to each question. Then, Sarabin asked what the people in the compound were doing when Rodriguez left. He answered that they were praying. Next, Sarabin called Kavanaugh, who reported that there was no observable activity in the compound. A special agent in the command post witnessed Sarabin's part of the conversation with Rodriguez. After Sarabin had hung up the phone, the agent stopped him and asked what Rodriguez had said. Sarabin responded that he had been with Koresh when Koresh was called from the room to take an emergency telephone call. When he returned to the room, he said that ATF and the National Guard were in Waco and were coming. Sarabin also stated that Rodriguez reported Koresh was nervous and dropped the Bible from which he was reading. The agent asked Sarabin, "What are you going to do?" He responded that Rodriguez had seen no firearms and that Koresh was reading the Bible when he left. He said he thought they could still execute the plan if they moved quickly. He arrived at the staging area at 9:10 a.m. Witnesses report that he was excited and obviously in a hurry. Agents in the parking lot, when Sarabin arrived, recall that he ran to them and told them that they had to hurry, making statements such as, "Get ready to go. They know we are coming, and they know ATF and the National Guard are coming. We're going to hit them now." Yet Charles Sarabin and Philip Winowski, the two federal agents in charge of leading the initial raid, would later be fired for lying to their superiors and investigators about what undercover agent Rodriguez had reported, corroborated by 61 different witnesses. Officials during the Waco investigation would even suggest on the record that the implication of their findings is that in lying to investigators, Mr. Sarabin and Mr. Winowski could be guilty of felony offenses. Not only did they lie about what was reported, they also attempted to shift blame to Mr. Rodriguez, later even altering documentary evidence. Robert Rodriguez would file lawsuits against his supervisors in the BATF in 1995, claiming that they had defamed him and conspired to make him a scapegoat, eventually settling out of court where he would receive over $2 million in damages. None of the real victims would ever receive a dime. More than 75 agents would roll up to Mount Carmel by 9:45 a.m., reportedly jumping out of the two cattle cars shouting "Showtime." The ATF would never attempt to serve the search warrant, the initial plan being one group of agents will break through the front door, while another group took ladders and smashed through the windows on the second floor where the women and children were. Multiple agents would later say that the Fed shot first, although that would be at the center of much controversy due to the official claims being that the Feds had shown restraint after being attacked by radical cult members led by a madman. One of the agents, while testifying in the San Antonio trial, would even back up the claim made by the Davidians about a separate group of ATF called the Dog Team. In the first few moments of the operation, were the ones responsible for the initial shots fired. They had gone up to the Davidians' fully enclosed dog kennel near the front door of the property with 5 Alaskan Malamutes, Fawn and her 4 pups, and their job was to shoot them in cold blood. Claims were made that agents then mistook the shots fired from the dog team as shots coming from the Davidians, and so they all opened fire on the house, sparking over a 2-hour-long firefight in the Texas prairie. Claims from inside the house were that as soon as they could hear helicopters, just moments before the shooting started, David and 2 or 3 other men ran down the stairs and said to the group in the cafeteria, "They're coming, they're on their way. Don't anyone do anything stupid. We're going to talk to them. That's what we're about here at Mount Carmel." He then ran to the front door, opened it, and yelled, "Hold on, there are women and children in here." And then all hell broke loose, 1 or 2 shots, and then a volley of gunfire, drowning out his final words as he fell back into the house. There were 3 different videotapes of the raid. 2 of the videotapes disappeared. In the 3rd videotape, when Congress asked for that, it had been turned into them, but it had been accidentally recorded over. These tapes would have proven exactly what happened in the early stages of the raid, answering one of the most pivotal questions in the case, starting with who shot first. Seconds after the raid ended, one of the group's members angrily claimed that the helicopters had come in from the backside of the house, firing at him from the air. The bullet trajectory for the shot that killed Davidian member Winston Blake was clearly at a downward angle from above through the roof of the house, obviously fired from the air. The official line would be that the helicopters were present only as a diversionary tactic, and that they had to be grounded due to the Big Bad Branch Davidians having the audacity to return fire. David Koresh had been shot in the hand and the stomach when the first shots had been fired, leaving him wounded. Within a minute, attorney Wayne Martin, member of the group and Harvard Law graduate, called 911, pleading for a ceasefire with audio tapes recording him saying, "Here they come again, and that's them shooting, that's not us." The 5 Branch Davidians killed in the initial raid the morning of the 28th were Winston Blake, Peter Grant, Peter Hipsman, Harry Jones, and Jaden Wendell. Their bodies were buried on the grounds. Nearly 6 hours after the 11:30 a.m. ceasefire, Michael Schroeder, whose wife was inside the compound, was shot dead by ATF agents who alleged he fired a pistol at agents as he attempted to re-enter the compound. The hat he was wearing at the time he was shot would also mysteriously go missing from evidence. Professor Emeritus of Law and Psychiatry at Harvard Law School, Alan Stone, would state in his report that the Branch Davidians did not ambush the ATF, and that they did not maximize the kill of ATF agents. 4 ATF agents were killed during the raid, and over 20 had sustained injuries. The ATF would continue attacking the house until they ran out of ammunition. After the ATF withdrew, they attempted to establish contact with Koresh and others inside the house. As a result of the deaths of federal agents, the FBI quickly took over the operation, naming Jeff Jamar as site commander, who had most recently been the head of the San Antonio field office. The FBI's blue and gold hostage rescue tactical teams had been mobilized to the site. HRT Commander Richard Rogers had been criticized for his actions at Ruby Ridge around 6 months prior to Waco. He would be in charge of the tactical teams, later receiving more criticism for overriding the site commander at Waco in the same way he did at Ruby Ridge. He was calling to resolve the situation tactically, causing friction with the FBI negotiators attempting to make progress in good faith with the group. According to the final Justice Department report, the 25 FBI negotiators heavily criticized the tactical commanders for undercutting their negotiations. Initially, David was trying to give phone interviews with local news media, but the FBI quickly cut the phone lines and shut off all water and power to the house. They had just negotiated a shipment of milk for the children still in the house when they shut off the power, subsequently causing that very same milk to spoil. These were the mind games they would play, serving to the negotiators' point of undercutting their ability to act in good faith. Negotiators also managed to facilitate the release of 19 children, along with a number of elderly women who would immediately be separated from the children, charged with conspiracy to murder government agents, and placed into 5-point chains and jumpsuits. The feds would then proceed to force these women to stand out in front of the Davidians' home, calling for them to come out. During the first week, the FBI would send a video camera into the house in order to show that there were no hostages and that people were staying inside on their own free will. The group recorded a videotape that included Koresh introducing his children and his wives to the negotiators, and several members would make statements in the video, including one made by David himself, that led to concern that the tapes released to the media could potentially gain sympathy for David and the group. 2 attorneys would be allowed entry to the house, and upon examining the evidence would tell the group they would have a strong case against the government. As the siege wore on, 2 opposing factions formed within the FBI. One believed the only solution was through negotiation. The other believed the only solution was force. Aggressive techniques started to be used, like sleep deprivation, for example, or all-night broadcasts of audio recordings playing the screams of rabbits being slaughtered and Buddhist chanting. The FBI had obtained from the U.S. Army 9 Bradley fighting vehicles equipped with ferret rounds and CS gas grenades, and 5 tanks they would call combat engineer vehicles. They were used at first to destroy the Davidians' cars, as well as perimeter fencing and outbuildings. They also disrespected the grave of one of the dead Branch Davidians despite protests from the FBI negotiators. According to the Dallas Morning News, FBI planners considered using snipers to kill David Koresh and other key Branch Davidians due to impatience around Koresh refusing to speak to them between April 5th through the 13th because of the Passover holiday. Despite David repeatedly denying any plan for mass suicide, the FBI would make public claims that the group might commit mass suicide like what had happened in 1978 at Jonestown. In what would become David Koresh's final statement to the world, he released a letter to his attorney on April 14th with the claim he was writing an interpretation of the 7 seals of the Book of Revelation, but he promised to exit the compound upon its completion. Quote, "I want the people of this generation to be saved. I'm working night and day to complete my final work of the writing out of these seals. I thank my Father. He has finally granted me the chance to do this. It will bring new light and hope to many, and they will not have to deal with me, the person. I will demand the first manuscript of the seals be given to you. Many scholars and religious leaders will wish to have copies for examination. I will keep a copy with me. As soon as I can see that people like Jim Tabor and Phil Arnold have a copy, I will come out, and then you can do your thing with this beast." Within the FBI, there was mounting frustration, each day becoming more of a stain on the agencies involved. Some agents claimed this letter was a delay tactic, while others saw it as a breakthrough. In the end, the decision was made to act. The 51-day siege would come to an end early in the morning on April 19th, after the FBI hostage rescue team had their recommendations to mount a full tactical assault on the compound approved by newly appointed Attorney General Janet Reno. Reno reportedly told President Bill Clinton at the time that the FBI HRT was tired of waiting, that the standoff was costing over $1 million per week, She also cited false claims made by the HRT that child sexual abuse and mass suicide were imminent, although the HRT would later officially deny making said claim. An article published at The Hill, written by the great Jim Bovard, put it perfectly. Shortly before the Waco showdown, U.S. government officials signed an International Chemical Weapons Convention treaty pledging never to use nerve agents, mustard gas, and other compounds, including tear gas, against enemy soldiers. But the treaty contained a loophole, permitting governments to gas their own people. On April 19, 1993, the FBI pumped CS gas and methyl chloride, a potential lethal flammable combination, into the Davidians' residence for 6 hours, disregarding explicit warnings that CS gas should not be used indoors. Stephen Schiff declared that the deaths of dozens of men, women, and children can be directly and indirectly attributable to the use of this gas and the way it was injected by the FBI. Chemistry professor George Uhlig testified to Congress in 1995 that the FBI gas attack probably suffocated the children early on and may have converted their poorly ventilized bunker into an area similar to one of the gas chambers used by the Nazis at Auschwitz. As Abrams tanks driven by FBI agents continually battered the Davidians' home, FBI loudspeakers endlessly broadcast, "This is not an assault." Prior to the fire, the tanks had collapsed 20% of the building atop its residence, and the FBI planned to totally demolish the home. Grenade launchers on the tanks and other armored vehicles fired almost 400 ferret rounds of CS gas through the thin wooden walls and windows of the building. Yet Attorney General Reno later insisted, "We didn't attack. We tried to exercise every restraint possible to avoid violence." The FBI speedily asserted that the Davidians ignited the fire that consumed their dwelling. The following day, President Bill Clinton deriding suggestions that Attorney General Reno should resign because some religious fanatics murdered themselves. 6 years later, independent investigators found pyrotechnic ferret rounds the FBI fired at the scene prior to the flames erupting. Attorney General Reno lashed out at the FBI for destroying her credibility, but neither she nor FBI officials suffered any consequences from the collapse of the official narrative. According to the fire development analysis provided in the report to the Deputy Attorney General, at around noon, 3 fires had broken out almost simultaneously in different parts of the building and spread very quickly. Only 9 people escaped the building during the fire, and Branch Davidian survivors, along with other explosives experts, maintained that the fires were either accidentally or deliberately started by the assault, possibly by the types of pyrotechnic rounds the FBI lied to the public about using for 6 years after Waco. The government still maintains that the fires were deliberately started by the Branch Davidians. The official line is that they didn't know CS gas was strictly manufactured to only be used as a riot control agent in an outdoor setting. It behaves very similarly to that of a grain silo in a controlled environment, creating an extreme fire hazard. Some people explain the building as being prepared by previous holes deliberately plunged through the top of the structure in order to create airflow and basically stage the house as a potbelly stove, primed and ready to go off. All they needed was to provide a spark. The rest of the women, along with 28 children, have been attempting to flee into the underground bunker when the tanks crushed the ceilings above them, killing some of the children due to blunt force trauma. Others, because of the confined space, died of asphyxiation due to the CS gas, which would show on their autopsies as dying of cyanide poisoning, causing their spines to forcefully contort, leaving their bodies deformed. The FBI would claim that in the final moments before death, members of the group had murdered their children brutally and then committed suicide. Officials claimed they had audio recordings from surveillance devices they had covertly snuck into the milk cartons that spoiled in the first days of negotiations, proving that the Davidians conspired to start the fires using gasoline. Only a transcript of the recordings would be provided. Survivors that heard the supposed audio during the trial claimed that this was clearly a lie, and that the recordings they heard proved nothing. Years later, by 1999, former CIA officer Gene Cullen had gone public with knowledge of Special Forces being present at Waco, overseeing the bloody conclusion. Details were given by the Dallas Morning News of at least 3 Delta Force commandos, members of a secret Army tactical unit, being present, up front and close, in helping the FBI in the final tear gas assault on the Branch Davidian compound. He continued saying that he heard the detailed accounts of the military's active involvement from 3 or 4 anti-terrorist Delta commandos as he worked with them on an overseas assignment in 1993. In total, 76 Branch Davidians were murdered that day, including 28 children. Why would they do this to these people? What is the prevailing mentality that could possibly justify such a reaction? As we conclude this dark and twisted American nightmare we can't seem to wake up from, we hang them by their own words. One of the FBI agents at Waco would say, 5,000 to 1. Those are the odds against us. 5,000 people to every one officer of the law. Do you know how we keep order with those odds? Because people believe we're more powerful than we are. We project strength, and the people believe in that strength. When we sit outside a place like this for weeks on end, waiting for them to tire, we look weak in front of the rest of the world, and every asshole with a bomb kit starts getting ideas. This is more than a situation now, Gary. This is a symbol. Are we the kind of agency that coddles cop killers? Like I said, we're all Branch Davidians now.